Life. I don't know if any of you woke up this morning and went, ugh, life. Life. There's just so much to it. There's so much that is attacking us and coming at us. Life, it's so big. It comes at us from all directions. You know, the car horn honks. Sunlight comes through the stained glass windows. The smell of lilacs in the spring or the smell of rain on a summer afternoon. The feeling when you stub your toe as you're walking barefoot on the sidewalk. The taste of a cough drop in your mouth. Every one of us receives this continuous barrage of information that's hitting all of our senses. It comes at us, life. It comes at us through our hearing and our seeing and our smelling and our touch and our taste. You know, most of the time we don't pay any attention to a single experience. You know, after all, then that means every day you and I would live like my son's dog when he's in the car, running from window to window yelling out, "Squirrel, squirrel, squirrel." Educational consultant Kendra Cherry says it this way. She says, instead, we center our attention on certain important elements in our environment, which means that the things around us, they tend to slip by completely unnoticed, or they become what we call background noise. So how is it that we decide what to focus on and what to ignore? Well, Ms. Cherry, she continues, she says, well, imagine that you're at a party for a friend, and the party is hosted at a very busy restaurant. There's multiple conversations going on, there's the clinking of forks and plates, and there's other sounds that are competing for your attention. Out of all of these noises, you find yourself able to tune out all that's irrelevant and focus on the most amusing story you've heard that your friend is sharing with you. It's truly an amazing skill that we have as human beings. To be able to focus on what your loved one is saying or what your child is asking. Even though all around you is filled with noise and distractions and smells and sights. And you know that some of you who really aren't able to do this focusing, you've heard the backlash, right? Aren't you listening to me? You know, this ability to focus on just one aspect of the total environment around us, it's called selective attention. It's what Pastor Jack and I pray for every Sunday morning. That you would be able to tune out the cell phone ringing and the baby crying and my favorite, the candy wrapper rustling, or even more sun that comes through the stained glass windows, or the air conditioner being too cool or not cool enough. We pray for selective attention on the message. Now, of course, we don't always need to use selective attention. 22 years ago today, unless you lived under a rock, every news media outlet had us focused on the news of the Twin Towers in New York City as they erupted into flames and they came tumbling down. The attack by terrorists reached every corner of our nation, and it didn't require us to focus. We didn't have to be told to concentrate on those images. And for some people, they didn't have to be told to concentrate on the images or the smells that lasted for weeks. It was impossible to look at anything else. But most of the time in our lives, we do have to be selective about what grabs our attention. Author Russell Revlin, he wrote a book called Cognition, Theory and Practice. And he says that in order to sustain our attention to one event in your everyday life, we have to filter out all of the other events. We must be selective in our attention by focusing on one particular event, and that happens to the detriment of all the other events. And this is because attention is a resource. Attention is a resource, and it's a resource that needs to be distributed to those events that are important to us. What he's saying to us is that our attention is a resource that we have, meaning that it's something that you can actually give. It means that it is limited in what you can do with it. It means that you have to choose what gets it and what doesn't. Today in the Gospel of Luke, which Rachel read for us, Jesus uses stories. We call them parables in the scriptures. And he uses them to help the followers and those who are asking questions to understand the way of God. And in this section, Luke recites Jesus telling us two different stories, or parables, if you will. The one is a shepherd who practices selective attention in searching for the one lost sheep. And the other story, it's found in the next couple of verses, in which a woman also practices selective attention when she's searching for a lost coin. In verses 8 through 10, we get to hear this story. Scripture says, "Or what woman, if she owns 10 silver coins and loses one of them, won't light up a lamp and sweep the house, searching her home carefully until she finds it? And when she does find it, she calls together her friends and neighbors and she says, 'Celebrate! Celebrate with me because I've found my lost coin.'" Now, here in these scriptures, in these parables, what Jesus is actually doing is he's not asking them a question to be answered. He's asking them a rhetorical question. He wants them to think a bit. And so the first question he asks is, well, who here? Who here would not leave 99 sheep out in the pasture and go after the one? And then when you do that, you would come back home and you would tell everybody about it and you would throw a party. Who here? The second story he asks, he's asking another rhetorical question. He says, who wouldn't lose something in your house and then turn your house upside down to find it? Even something seemingly so insignificant as one coin. And then who here, when you find it, wouldn't call all of your friends and then throw a big party? Who here? Who here this morning wouldn't do that? Who here this morning hasn't lost something in your house, your cell phone, your keys, whatever, and have turned your house upside down, and when you found it, called all of your friends and threw a big party? Probably none of you. Probably no one would do that. I mean, seriously, think about the shepherd. He would look like an absolute fool if he went and told the other shepherds that he left 99 sheep out in the pasture in the wilderness to go searching for the one sheep that he lost. And then when he did it, to go back and tell him he did it, and then to try and throw a party. And think about that woman. She turns her entire house upside down to find one coin. And then if she called you, what would you say? So what? Congratulations. But no, I'm not coming to a party because you lost one coin. But Jesus is telling us something very important. He's telling us that is the way it is in heaven. That's the way it is in heaven. Because heaven values things differently than we do here on earth. Heaven's values are different than earth's values. And so he's asking us a rhetorical question this morning. What do you value? What do you value? It's like the disapproval that Jesus faced by the Pharisees and the religious leaders, where when he sat at the table with sinners and tax collectors. It's like the disapproval that we face here at First Church. When the city officials and the leaders here in Millville, they disapprove of our church feeding and loving on the outcasts of the city. What do you value? Now, in order for us to focus our attention, and in order for us to focus our attention on what we value, there are two different models that we can use. The first one is a spotlight model, and the second one is called a zoom lens model. If you've ever been to Broadway to see a live show, or perhaps even a school play, you've seen how they use a spotlight. They use a spotlight to draw our attention on whomever is speaking or the scene and the action that is happening. And like that high-powered spotlight, we in our lives can put a spotlight on something that we see or we hear or even that we taste. And just like a spotlight on the stage, if you think about that, you can still see what's happening around the edges. It might be in the dark, it might be a little blurry, but you can see things that are happening outside of just that spotlight. This is called the spotlight model. Now, the other model, think of it more like the camera that's on your phone. You can use that zoom feature when you go to take a picture or a video. And when we use that zoom feature, we can zoom right in and we can highlight on exactly what we want to see. And still, like that high-powered spotlight, we focus in on that sound or that taste. But then you realize if you take that zoom lens and you focus back out, you see a whole lot more. You see a whole lot of chaos and distraction. So you zoom it back in, and when you zoom in, you cannot see what's happening on the outside. You only see what's inside that zoomed lens. Hence the zoom lens model. So in the parable of this woman who lost her coin, Jesus tells us that she focused in on that coin, that she had 10 in her hand, 10, and she lost 1. And so what does she do? Well, she goes and she lights a lamp and she sweeps the house looking for it. She carefully searches. It's like when you and I get on the floor with a flashlight looking for our lost contact lens, or a piece of jewelry, or that one tiny part that came in all the parts when you're trying to build something. And we flash that light around. We can still see what's happening on the outside, but we're focused on finding that lost thing. And then the woman, and Jesus tells us, until finally she found the lost coin and it shines in the light. And then what does she do? Well, she calls her friends together and she says, "Rejoice, let's party. I found my lost coin." Now, in the other parable of the story where Jesus tells us about a shepherd who lost 1 sheep. Now, none of you are shepherds, I presume, but you can probably get a fair good idea that when a shepherd is out in the field, the shepherd is keeping their eyes wide open, surveying the entire pasture, looking for any kind of danger against those 100 sheep that are out there. His vision is zoomed way wide. He's trying to keep track of 100 sheep. To the teachers here this morning, think of it this way: 100 children on a field trip to the zoo, and only 1 chaperone. Your eyes are zoomed wide. Parents, if you've gone on a trip, you know what this is like. You're trying to watch them all going around in different directions. And then when one becomes lost, when that 1 sheep became lost, the shepherd zoomed in to find that 1 lost sheep. And then when he finds it, Jesus tells us what happens. He's so thrilled to death, he picks the sheep up and puts it on his shoulders and then carries that sheep back home and then tells all of his friends and his neighbors, "And rejoice. Celebrate. I found the one who was lost. Now, when we tell that story, you might be thinking a question that I had. Why is it good that the shepherd left a whole bunch of sheep, 99 of them out in the pasture, and went after the one? It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, wouldn't it be more sensible to keep track of the 99 than to go off traipsing looking for one? Pastor Kyle Idleman, he wrote a book called One at a Time. It's a book that now the pastors and I are going through to read. And he says this: what we find in our Gospels is that Jesus, again and again, impacted the whole world through one-to-one encounters. Jesus didn't just use selective attention once or twice. It was his standard operating procedure. So Pastor Idleman, he opens this book with a great assumption. He says, nobody grows up dreaming of waking up, going to work, heading home, watching Netflix, scrolling through our social media, just to do it all over again the next day. Day after day, until their last breath. We all want somewhere in our lives to be used to change the world. We want to be difference makers. And so we have to ask, well, how did Jesus do that? How was Jesus a difference maker in this world? Selective attention. He focused on the one. He focused and he zoomed and he spotlighted the one. So which model do you and I use? Which model do you and I use to master this skill of selective attention? Well, the answer is both. Jesus used both. One coin, one sheep, one sinner at a time. Put the spotlight on the coin, not on the other 99. He put the zoom lens on the one sheep and not the other 99. And then he tells us what happens when we do that. What happens when you and I begin to practice this great skill? Joy, rejoice, celebrate. That's what's happening in heaven. I'd like you to imagine that you yourself have already gone on to heaven. And you're in heaven and news comes around that your child, your spouse, your best friend just accepted Jesus into their life. Would you not celebrate? Would you not be filled with joy? Would you not want to rejoice and say, guess what? We're going to be together again. So the next question is, are you ready to celebrate? In the same way, I tell you, joy breaks out in the presence of God's angels over one sinner who changes their heart and their life. Now, this all sounds like fun, right? I mean, who doesn't like to party? But there's a problem. You see, when people like you and I follow Jesus, and we follow all the rules, we're in church, we're in a Bible study, we're volunteering out in the community, we're doing all the right things. You and I have a difficulty. And the difficulty comes when Jesus gives his attention to those people who don't. When he gives his attention to the people who aren't doing the right things and aren't following all of the rules. Remember in the story, the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they did a lot of grumbling. They grumbled about who Jesus was with. They grumbled about who he was paying attention to. They grumbled about who he was eating with. They grumbled about who he was speaking with. They grumbled about who he was healing. They grumbled about who he was feeding. It upset them. It upset them that Jesus was eating with sinners and tax collectors. He was eating with those people that he was not supposed to. They were holding on to bitterness. They had followed all the rules. They were doing all the right things. You know, it does upset some people in our town here that we feed homeless people. Like as if some way we are attracting stray cats and wild animals out of the woods. And we've heard from city leaders that those people don't deserve a warm meal and a compassionate face. Given their backgrounds, given the way they live, they're not attractive. Look what they've done in their past. Why do they get a free meal? Have you in your life ever looked around and have you ever wondered, why them? I mean, I've gone to church my whole life. I've been in Bible studies my whole life. I tithe at least 10% of my income every year to give back to God, and I've learned to live on 90%. I exercise. I try and eat healthy. Why them? Why is Jesus focusing on them and not on me? And does that ever make you feel a little jealous? Or maybe a little bit angry? Do you feel a little bit of bitterness? Bitterness that you can't let go of? Well, step number one to selective attention, and the problem that we have is we need to let go of that bitterness. We need to let go of that bitterness that arises up inside of us every time we feel that God is focusing more on others than he is on us. I mean, you're all in church this morning. You have some background. You heard a couple of sermons. Maybe you've been to a Bible study, or perhaps even, God bless you, you've been reading through our daily reading plan that's in your bulletin. What have you heard about God? Have you heard that Jesus withholds love from certain people? Have you heard that Jesus is limited in some way by how he calls people to his Father? Have you heard that he came looking just for the healthy souls and the righteous hearts? Is that what you've heard about Jesus? Or have you heard about a Savior who came specifically to save those who were lost? Have you heard that he came to heal those who were sick? Have you heard that Jesus withholds his mercy and grace from no one? Have you heard that Jesus calls all to his Father? And what about you? What about you? Perhaps it was, like last week that you heard the voice of Jesus and you answered. Or maybe for you, it's been a long, long time that you made the choice to follow Jesus, and you've lived your years following and serving and learning. Do you have some bitterness towards others? Do you have some bitterness that comes up inside of you when you don't always feel like Jesus is focused always on you? Bitterness robs us of the gift. So first, we have to let go of this bitterness. And then step number 2 is to do something we all love to do. Rejoice. Celebrate. Party. I know some of you like to party. I've seen some pictures. We need to rejoice that Jesus has an ongoing search for the lost ones. He uses the spotlight and the zoom lens, and Jesus is searching. Maybe he's searching for you right now. No, he is. He is searching for you right now. That's why you came this morning. That's why you tuned in this morning. You know, maybe somewhere in your past you caught a glimpse of Jesus. Maybe you caught a glimpse of him earlier in your life, but stuff got in the way. You know, you weren't able to tune out all the distractions that are happening in life, and you weren't able to turn and give him selective attention. I want to tell you this morning, it is never too late. It is never too late to give Jesus selective attention because he is always searching for you. And then when you do respond and you do say, "Here I am, Lord," then you're going to experience the gift, the joy, rejoicing and celebrating. Don't we all rejoice when one person is saved? Don't we all get a big smile on our face when we hear that someone has accepted Christ into their lives? Don't we all feel warm and fuzzy and kind of like we want to throw a party when someone we know who's been struggling and lost finally comes and accepts Jesus? Don't we all get really excited when someone we've heard about who has been lost and struggling and going down the wrong path is now following Christ? We want to throw a party for the one. And I think it's because we've all been there. At some point in our lives, we were sinners who were in need of being found. At some point in our lives, we felt lost, at least once. And we were waiting to be found by someone who loves us. John Newton wrote in his lyrics to the song Amazing Grace, "I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see." And now that we have been found, it doesn't stop there. Now that you've been found, you've been invited. You've been invited to be part of the search party. You've been invited to join with Jesus and go on the search and find the one who is lost. You are welcome to join in with him in the work that he's doing here on this earth, searching for the lost, the hungry, the lonely, and the hurting. Because we've all been there. At some point, we've all been there. And Jesus was searching for you. And I pray you accepted it, that he was searching for you and that you had been found. And so that now you can see. Jesus says joy breaks out in the presence of God's angels over just one. Just one. Who doesn't like to party? Pastor Eidelman said it this way. He says, all of that doesn't happen when one person simply loves everyone. It happens one at a time. It happens when we, as the church, the family, the brothers and sisters of Christ, it's when we have a mission and a vision and a purpose that is what we are going to be about. One. You know, God doesn't throw a party when an entire generation is saved. God doesn't throw a party when an entire ethnic group is saved. God doesn't throw a party when an entire economic class is saved. God's angels sing when one is saved. When one changes their heart and their life. And so today, if you haven't, I want you to know Jesus is still searching for you. He does not stop. And we're not going to stop. And if you haven't found him, then I hope today is the day that you hear his voice and that you focus your attention, spotlight him or zoom him and get him in on your life. And we're going to party when you do. We are going to rejoice. And the angels in heaven are going to sing out in praise. You know, we all know that Jesus wants us to love everyone. We've heard that since we were little. And he wants us to do it just like he does. So how does he do it? He does it one at a time. And so he challenges us to focus our selective attention, focus it on the lost coin, the lost sheep, the lost sinner, the lost family member, the lost friend, the lost coworker, the lost neighbor, the lost spouse. And he pushes us to join his search team and go looking for the lost, the one who's walking around. And when we do this, church, we're going to party, and we're going to rejoice, and we're going to celebrate together. Amen.